Welcome back. We're here for our green couch chats. Midwives talk about all things, all the questions you had, and you didn't even know you had them. Kelly came up with a fantastic topic for today.
Okay, so here's the thing. Midwives are often accused of having old wives' tales. But I'm going to flip the script and suggest that medicine also has a number of their own old wives' tales, and we're here today to dispel some of them.
Oh, I like it. I like it. Old medical tales. Is that what you call them? That doesn't sound as fancy.
No,
I'm going to think of a different word for it.
So
Stuff that people say that is not based on anything.
That's right.
Okay, great. That seems like a way more
Made up.
condensed and great way of saying things.
Yeah, and so
Make an
the
acronym.
reason why I even came up with this topic in the first place is because I accompany people to the hospital for their births and hear some interesting things and interesting guidance from providers there. And one of the things that I hear a lot, because both you and I recommend that folks take sitz baths to
Absolutely.
heal their perineums after birth. And I heard a provider just the other day, not for the first time, recommend not taking a bath. So using that sitz bath as opposed to actually like sitting in a bathtub. I don't know about you, I hate sitz baths.
They're not the most comfortable.
So what we're talking about here is those upside down plastic hat things that you put into your toilet.
Yeah. And actually, sitz baths were designed for hemorrhoid relief.
Exactly.
And so a lot of people find that like when they sit in this little kind of hat that goes in the toilet, two things happen. One, they're like, just my anus is getting like water, which if you have hemorrhoids, amazing. And like, that's exactly what it's for. So great. But if you're actually trying to heal something a little further, sometimes you kind of have to angle yourself in a weird way to get fully soaked.
And people will complain about the pressure on their body.
Exactly. That was the other thing I was going to say. Sometimes, like, especially if you've never felt swelling in your vulva, you sit down, you kind of spread your legs open, you're sitting over this thing, and it feels like everything's going to fall out, which, like, it's not. Like, I would say vast majority of the time, nothing's falling out, but it feels so intense. And so sitz bath is supposed to be like a beautiful self-care time and a time to carve out space for yourself. So sitting there being like, oh, I hate this. What angle do I need to get? Not the best. With you for sure. I mean, for some people, those sitz baths are amazing.
Sure, if your anatomy fits, right?
Totally,
But
you just have to know yourself.
I don't know if you've seen one of these things. There's a pretty small target there, and we're different shapes and sizes, right? But the other thing the other piece of this, the recommendation for actually not using your bathtub is that your bathtub is not a cleanly place, and like that would invite in potentially infection into your uterus. And I am going to posit this. I don't have a study to prove this, but neither do they. Taking a plastic hat and putting it in your common toilet is going to be less sanitary than washing your own bathtub where people don't poop and pee, but just generally bathe.
100%.
That is what I'm positing. I'm inviting someone to prove me wrong, but there are plenty of studies that actually look at surface types and bacterial growth. And plastic is way, way, way more likely to grow crap than natural substances or epoxy sealed plastics.
Much more porous.
Much more porous.
And the ones that we get that are somewhat disposable would be, I would argue, the more times you use it with hot water. All of these things. Yes.
And in like hospital transmitted infections, plastic surfaces are actually usually the culprits. That is what I learned from my research.
Oh, I like this.
So I'm going to posit, and someone out there, you're going to have to prove me wrong with a study. Tell me that sitz baths are more sanitary than using your own clean bathtub. Challenge. Go for it.
Please pause for an important midwife phone call.
So let's talk about the stitches.
Yeah, so the one thing that I've heard as well is that we should limit soak times to 20 minutes in order to, hold the integrity of the stitches if you've had stitches in your perineum. I've even had providers tell folks that they shouldn't take a bath for 6 weeks.
Whoa.
And so, I mean, old wives' tale. We can talk all about how 6 weeks is actually a garbage number in just a minute. But I'm going to tell you this. That material that they're using, the Vicryl or the chromic or whatever kind of dissolvable suture they're using, it loses tensile strength in 7 to 10 days.
Absolutely, it does.
So it's not doing, even if it's still there at 6 weeks, it is literally doing nothing.
I often take it out at my 2 weeks just because I'm like, why
would we have it here? You don't need it anymore. And in fact,
sorry about that.
very important. Yeah, I mean, in fact, like most of the surface level healing that kind of glues the tissue together is kind of wrapped up in the first 1 to 2 days.
100%. I mean, we know really clearly. This also brings me to the tape on C-sections, just reminded me of that. But those epithelial cells are growing by 48 hours.
Right.
A nice, beautiful layer of protection has grown across any open wound pretty quickly. And so that makes me feel really comfortable in terms of like infection control. It's the same thing. It just reminded me, little off topic, but tape on the C-section incision, that is so gross and so nasty. And I hear people say all the time, hey, just leave that till it falls off. And people are so nervous to touch their incision, which I would be too if I knew nothing about incisions. And then someone was like, leave that tape on. I'd be like, girl, I'm leaving it on. Like if this is doing something, like, yes. But actually what it is doing is just getting dirty and building bacteria, but there's nothing in terms of tissue integrity that it's helping. So take off the tape of your C-section probably within 48 hours. Like after 48 hours, I think it's not doing anything.
Oh, totally. They've done studies on this, and really most of that like strength that they're looking for with that tape is done within 24 hours.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And a lot of it's also protection a bit in that first 24-hour time.
Absolutely.
So anyways, that just reminded me of like gross things that are gross.
Yeah. Also,
maybe that's the topic of today.
Medical old wives' tale, right? That's what we're talking about. So it makes sense.
I also was thinking about sitz baths because I do like the soaking aspect, but I do realize that sometimes like we tell folks to do stuff, but like maybe they've got another kid and also like getting into like a whole bath, sitting here like talking about it. I'm like, I could totally carve out time for a bath, but like when was the last time I took a bath? I've got 3 kids, right?
Oh, totally.
So I sometimes tell people like, get a nice clean washcloth, soak it, like get a little bowl, put it next to your bed and like dip, squeeze, compress, dip, squeeze, compress, because that actually is like a slightly easier way. And I usually leave a Chuck's pad, which is just like a waterproof pad. It's whatever. Sit on that thing, do a compress. You can like watch a show while you're doing it, whatever, like chill out. But then it doesn't feel so major where you're like, I need to carve out this time. And like, where's the candles? I got to light it. You know what I mean? Which is lovely. And if you can do it, like I'm all for it. Like please get in that bathtub and like soak, like flow flowers, like whatever you want to do. I'm here for it. But I think sometimes we have to be practical as well.
Absolutely.
And so like do also what's easy. Yeah. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's also an important piece of all of this.
Absolutely. I love compresses. Okay. So you're going to tell me what's your medical old wives' tale?
Oh, yeah. So this one is going to be a bit controversial. But it is how people are kind of counseled around engorgement. Yeah. And so a couple years ago, and I have to admit that I changed my counseling a ton, which like as providers, we have to grow. Like there's no way we can just stay stagnant in any of our kind of recommendations when new information is presented. That makes a ton of sense.
Absolutely. Can I pause there for just a second and put an asterisk on this and say that oftentimes clinical research, so when we get actually good reaffirming data from the clinical research, it takes 10 to 15 years to make that into clinical practice. So when you walk into a hospital and you think you are getting state-of-the-art care, you're actually getting care that's at least a decade old. I just want to let that sink in. So we may know things, but it's not making it into those protocols. So I think that's a really important lens with which to see larger institutions that are practicing medicine.
I 100% agree with that. I will also add one more thing, which is in particularly engorgement and mastitis. There's been a big shift in the past like 2 years because of this paper that came out. But when you actually look at the paper, and I've seen a lot of hospitals now with their protocols say things like, new evidence tells us blah, 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 blah. But when you actually read the actual paper, the level of evidence on most of the recommendations that are put forth in that paper are professional consensus. And so it's so unbelievably important to look at the level of evidence when you're reading a paper and when you're taking recommendations from an organization, because professional consensus, while important, like all of us as providers come with our experience, our lived experience, plus our professional experience, plus everything we've like learned, gathered. However, I don't know if I know who the professionals are that are consenting, like that are making this consensus.
We could argue that this is our professional consensus right now.
Exactly. But so it's just so important so that like when someone says like new evidence, you have to be really careful with that verbiage because it's not necessarily new evidence. It's a new way of thinking in the community. And you can take that for what it's worth, but you also have to know who's making that recommendation,
100%.
where they're coming from, and what evidence they're using to back that up. So anyways, all of that is to say that engorgement. I changed my thinking around this so much when I went to a seminar by Maya Bowman. Am I saying her name right? I hope I am. Podcasters, please don't hate me if I'm saying her. I'm terrible with names, but she's incredible. Breast gymnastics. If you just type in breast gymnastics, her stuff will come up. She's also written a bunch of papers. She really started changing the thinking around engorgement from not being a, breast or chest that's full of milk, but actually being this kind of really intricate structure of fat cells with the interstitium coming around it that's full of lymph fluid. Because when all that milk comes in, all of those ducts kind of get swollen and their body's like, whoa, fullness, we've never felt this, stretching, inflammation, everyone send fluid, because fluid is really kind of the way that our body cleans everything out, right?
Absolutely.
Fluid is we're here for it. We want our lymph to be flowing. But because those fat cells are so just mobile and there's not a lot of kind of stability within that structure, lymph gets trapped. It gets trapped all around there. And so I usually tell people that it's trapped lymph versus full of milk by the way it feels. If you feel around kind of your breast or chest area and you're ooh, this side feels ropey and feels kind of full and it's not that tender, but it's kind of, I can really distinguish little structures in there. Those could be some suspensory ligaments or maybe even just full ducts, right? But if you feel a size that's I'm looking to the camera, making it with my hands. Okay, a couple inches wide, and maybe it feels like one large space is all hard. That's trapped lymph. That's not swollen ducts from milk. And so people used to really try to just squeeze out a bunch of milk or vigorously massage that area to try to move the milk out. But if you think about it as trapped lymph, really it's the kind of opposite you want to do. It's so gentle. You hold your beautiful breast or chest tissue and you hold it so gently like jello, and you move it and you move it and you move it with this idea that kind of that muscle layer underneath that structure is like a colander. And you're just trying to kind of move fluid so it goes through this web of all these fat cells and gets back into the lymph system. And so when you rethink massage in that way and you rethink where the swelling is coming in that way, it makes sense to do warm, not cold. Cold is very constrictive, right? So constricting things would be a good thing in an acute situation where I'm oh shoot, something just opened. Let's not get all the fluid. Let's just get some fluid. So I'm going to go ahead and put some ice on it, and that might constrict some vessels. Anything further than 24 hours out, even maybe a couple hours, what are we constricting?
You don't need to convince me.
I know.
Chinese. I'm no, ice is for dead people.
I say that quote all the time. I was do you guys know Kelly? This is what she says about ice. It makes me laugh so hard. But the point is really starting to think about if I'm thinking about trapped fluid in a space, what would be the most helpful? Do I want my vessels to be open and mobile? Do I want my fluid to be soft and moving? What moves better, ice or water? I'm guessing water, right? And we all know fat cells, if fat cells are what's trapping it, I think some warmth might actually loosen that up. And it has changed people's lives, and it's changed my practice 100%. I just was with someone who, I think you delivered one of her babies. Anyway, she was on her fourth baby. She's had a hard spot in her breast for 9 years. 9 years. And she's had 4 babies, so she's been nursing a lot of that time and could not get rid of the spot. We talked about it. She rethought the way she was thinking about this hard spot as lymph instead of just trapped milk, which is what she thought it was. I went and saw her 3 days of doing massage, self-massage, nothing that I did. She did it herself. We just talked through how to do it. Gone. She's I cannot believe for 9 years I had this hard spot and it was literally just trapped fluid. Wild.
It is wild.
But that's why the new recommendations around ice it, don't massage it. They actually say like,
no,
which is so wild.
crazy.
Don't massage, there needs to be an explanation around what massage. Yeah, it's not vigorous. It's not a muscle, right? We're not working any muscle knockout.
That's right.
But gentle massage, absolutely. And mobility of that structure.
Totally.
And then other things that are saying, or whatever, we could go down the whole list of them.
Well,
and some of them are legit, like, maybe probiotics. Great. Sure. I'm here for that. Like NSAIDs, some anti-inflammatories. Great.
Feel better for sure.
Like I'm here for all that.
And also like the other thing that I've heard a lot of people counsel around is like, it's like a swollen ankle. It's like a twisted ankle. I'm like, no, it's not like that though. It's not like that. There was an acute trauma with a sprained ankle, right? This was a gradual influx of a lot of fluid when your milk comes in. And to Serena's point, some of that recruitment of extra fluid gets trapped. But this was not like I fell down a flight of stairs and oh my God, my boobs are suddenly engorged. It wasn't like that. And so to think of it directly as some sort of acute trauma is just a bad analogy.
Right. But also I think it brings up this idea that like even ideas around how to deal with a sprained ankle also really differ depending on what modality, right? Like what modality you're using. I was just talking to someone recently and I was talking about cabbage and I was like, throw a cabbage leaf in there. There's actually been a couple decent studies on cabbage leaves. And now like some new company is like trying to like extract things from cabbage and make it a cream. And I'm like, just use the
head of cabbage. Just
use the cabbage.
Like $4.
Right. Why are we overthinking this? Anyways, but she was saying, she's from like Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh yeah. She's like, we use cabbage on anything swollen.
Yeah.
She's like swollen ankle, swollen knee, da, da, da. She's like, we wrap that in cabbage and like, that's part of like our culture and something we do.
Yeah.
And we do heat.
Right. Oh yeah.
Right. So anyways, and I know Chinese medicine too, like heat all day long. Yeah. So anyways, interesting.
You don't need to convince me. I'm convinced.
Yeah. So if you've made padsicles, like maybe use it for something else.
Like there are specific indications for sure. Like there are very specific injury types where we might recommend ice to limit that inflammation. To Serena's point, those acute injuries, like sometimes ice is really a nice thing, but it is almost never warranted past that 24-hour mark. And I will say they did do I'm big on my clinical research.
I know. I love it. I love that.
I like to inform myself about what they're doing studies on. And they did actually do a study on folks who used ice in the first 24 hours. And it didn't really change anything. So like those first 24 hours, it wasn't really impactful in terms of changing the course of healing. But what was impressive is that folks who used ice had quicker and more intense return of pain when they stopped versus people who didn't.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense, right? Because as soon as that tissue warms up again, it's like, oh, right, I have to get all this stuff out there. You kept me out and I'm here for healing, right? And so there's a big influx, right? There's almost kind of an inflammatory reaction in response to that. And we know that to be true. Frostbite injuries, right? Like there's so many examples of like cold actually causing trauma. Yes, I know heat causes trauma too, but that's not the kind of heat that we're talking about. We're not asking you to scald your boob in boiling hot water.
I always tell people, I'm like, get, the hottest water that feels good for you, but like you're an adult, don't burn yourself.
Right. That is, please be an adult. We trust you. So yeah, I think those are like,
oh, I love that.
Sage wisdom out there. Yeah. Sage wisdom. So yeah, I don't know.
Those are some good ones. I like those. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's other ones that I've heard. I mean, I'm sure there's so many wild ones. Yeah. And, I also think that like when we talk about old wives' tales, there are often like, there is something that you're like, oh yeah, there's like something kind of to that, right? Like when stories have been told over and over again, or traditions come in where like, you're like, God, how come in like every single culture, like compression after, in the postpartum, like, why is there so many cultures that do that? What's that about? And you have to start thinking and wondering, like, is it just this like grandmas passed it on to grandmas, or is there like something to it?
There's absolutely something to it. And we need to trust that. This is part of the work that I do with folks, is like really kind of tuning into your own intuition, because it's actually there. We just have to like remove the layers that modern society has placed on top of it. It's there. It's really there when we start making like observations about our own body, our babies, our birth process. You really do get it, right? Yeah. But you need to filter out a little bit of the noise in order to let it be there and let it kind of announce itself.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I guess maybe that's the last myth, that someone else is an expert of your body.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the last one. That's a nice one to
I
end
think
with.
so.
You're the expert.
Yeah, you're the expert.
Yeah.
I sit down with folks and I ask them all the time, well, what do you think?
Yeah.
Right? Because it actually doesn't matter what I think at the end of the day. If your body is telling you something different, I'm clearly just not getting the message right.
Totally.
Right? So
Totally.
you're telling me something that you intuit about your body, and I'm not reading it that way. Well, then I just need to spend a little bit more time trying to figure out like what it is that you're trying to communicate to me, because I'm not in your body. I don't feel the sensations in your body. You do. And it is really okay to like advocate strongly for your own intuition, because it is so potent and so powerful, especially in this more animalistic state that we get into when we're pregnant and in our postpartum.
Yeah. What a nice way to like just navigate your whole life. Believing in yourself. Who knew? Who knew that was a thing, to believe in yourself? Love it. I think that wraps it up. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that's great.
I think we got some good ones. Next time we'll be in another amazing topic. Who knows what it's going to be, but I know it's going to be great. All right.
Okay. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.